All aboard! Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, football fans of all ages, I am Beast Mikey. You've now arrived in my train of thoughts. It's time to talk about Week 7. A lot happened. People came back. Other people got blown out. Plenty of injuries happened, which was really unfortunate. And the Cowboys and Bears were able to watch it all from home because they were off. Let's talk about the other 30 teams and what they did and how they did it. Let's get to business. For the Saints, it was a vintage evening. It was an evening to honor the greatest player in their franchise history in Drew Brees. It was an evening to kind of sort of welcome back the greatest coach in their history in Sean Payton. Yet he was coaching the Broncos, but it was still probably good to see him back in the Superdome for Saints fans. It was also a time to honor the paper bag tradition that the Saints have really popularized in the 1970s. But why would a Saints fan have a paper bag over his face? Well, it's back to Sean Payton. Payton's a really good coach, and he's got a Super Bowl ring for a reason. Not just Drew Brees. He's just a really good coach. The Broncos are coming in with a really good defense, and they came into New Orleans without Patrick Surtain, a.k.a. the best quarterback in the league. And that defense suddenly has a pass rush, and they smothered. And they smothered Spencer Rattler, and they made life miserable for all the receivers that weren't Chris Godwin and Rashid Shaheed, who were both out for this game, the latter being out for the year. And Alvin Kamara got absolutely nothing done because the Broncos wouldn't allow it. This was a brutal evening for Saints fans, aside from the Brees tribute and probably cheering Payton at the start of the game. But other than that, this was a ugly evening, and the Aints bags over the fans' heads were good for the other ops in the NFC South. Just not for New Orleans, whose season started really well at 2-0 and has been really awful ever since. Yikes. I'm going to have to never pick the Patriots again because I give them one chance to think, okay, Jacksonville is spiraling out of control. Their season's probably done, and Doug Peterson might get fired before getting back on the plane to Jacksonville. Yeah, I'm not going to do that again. That was a effortless beatdown from pretty much the second quarter on for the Jaguars. Tank Bigsby did his thing. Trevor Lawrence was actually good for once. And this was a beatdown that was relatively easy for Jacksonville. Drake May, to be fair to him, is not bad. He looks efficient and he looks productive. He can get the ball downfield. Maybe in time New England will have decent receivers and he can get the ball downfield too. That would be nice for the Patriots, I'd imagine. As for Jacksonville, they saved themselves for now, even though I don't know how far they could really go, aside from across the pond back to the United States. And it just feels like their season's still kind of lost. This was at best 2 out of 3 impromptu, if you will, between the AFC South and AFC East. Round 2 happened in Buffalo, where Tennessee decided not to start the meme guy. Meme Mayo, Will Levis, actually got the day off, and instead it was Mason Rudolph. He did not meme. He wasn't also hitting the head with a helmet. Progress was made. He actually also started out pretty well when the Titans had a 10-0 lead. And then Buffalo decided, okay, that's enough of that, and proceeded to stampede all over Tennessee. This turned into a beatdown where James Cook got involved, and Josh Allen did his thing, and Amari Cooper was welcomed to Buffalo with open arms and a tutty, and then Keon Coleman actually had his best day as a pro. This turned into a blowout for Buffalo, but Tennessee didn't do anything that was truly humiliating. This is just a really run-of-the-mill bad loss for Tennessee. Just not embarrassing. So it just falls into the trap that is the 1 o'clock afternoon games where nobody's going to care unless you have people on your fantasy team. Poor Calvin Ridley. He's not poor, but he's just not doing much in Tennessee. So now we get to the tiebreaker of AFC East versus South. And for a lot of this game, the Dolphins felt like the better team. They ran the ball really well, and when they decided to throw it, which wasn't often, most of it went in the middle, and most of it was good because Jonnu Smith was productive. Okay, people will complain that Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle didn't do too much, but I think that was by design, and to some degree, where Miami could just run the ball and try to shorten the game. It was the smart thing to do. They got out to a 10-0 lead, and unfortunately did nothing else, which is not great. Where Miami lost this game was twofold. First, there were penalties in the first half that stalled drives and stopped drives and really got in the way of some momentum that Miami could have potentially caused that could have helped put this game away. And in the second half, it wasn't really the penalties, it was backbreaking fumbles. 2 of them. The first was returned inside the Dolphins' red zone. Indy scored a touchdown on that. The second was in Indy's red zone. It was on a fullback dive for some reason. And Alec Ingold fumbled the second one. Raheem Mostert fumbled the first one. And the latter fumble, as in later in the game, cost Miami at minimum 3 and maybe even more than that with the way the Dolphins were running the ball. Even with all of that, and Indianapolis scoring 16 unanswered, the Dolphins had a chance to win the game. And Tim Boyle, who came in for Snoop Huntley, who got hurt in the third quarter, actually had a respectable drive. Until he decided to find Devon Chan in the flat where he had nowhere to go, and that basically was the beginning of the end. They wasted third down on a spike, and then Tim Boyle did on fourth down what he should have did on second down and threw the ball away, and that was the game. It was a frustrating end to a Dolphins game that had no business being a loss, yet is. And it's Miami's own fault. A soul for a soul. You may remember this line from the Avengers Infinity War movie. To me, it's the best of all the Avenger movies so far. And if you got the Soul Stone, you have the ability to control life and death. That's what Thanos did, and part of the reason why he was able to do what he did with the snap of his fingers. If you haven't seen that movie, where have you been? Anyway, I've kind of brought this analogy to sports in the sense of a sports soul for a sports soul, or sports souls for sports souls. I'll explain this in different ways throughout this particular video. Part 1 being a local sacrifice. For one team to be successful, another one kind of has to falter. And I've used this example, especially lately, when it comes to Cleveland sports. The Guardians, playing good ball, playing good baseball, and having an incredible Game 3 with the Yankees. I actually did this game for Sirius with the Yankees Spanish broadcast. Ricky Ricardo got wiggled in real time. It wasn't great. I kind of heard his soul get crushed with the 2 bombs that were hit, one by Noel and one by Fry. And in exchange, you got the Browns. Yeah, it didn't go well for Cleveland, at least on the football field. Sure, they were relatively decent against Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase and company, but no, things still didn't go well for their offense because they can't do that, aside from Nick Chubb scoring, which is good. And then Deshaun Watson got hurt, which some people cheered and consider that a win. I personally am not going to cheer against Watson's injury. It's unfortunate that it happened to go down this way, but I think it's on the board that he may never play it down as the Browns starting quarterback again. That's on the board. It's on a very expensive board, but on the board. Anyway, Cincinnati was the better team. They finally get a win in Ohio, and they can at least take that back to the jungle as they try to save their season. For Cleveland, the season's already lost, Watson or not. And will they actually trade Myles Garrett? People are trying to claim that there's some interest there. If I'm Cleveland, I'm not doing it, but there are people who are claiming interest. A soul for a soul of the sports variety. Well, Cleveland did win that Game 3 against the Yankees, but unfortunately lost Games 4 and 5. The 5th game ended with a mammoth bomb from Juan Soto to close out the series and get the Yankees to the World Series. So, what's the Yankees sacrifice? Or the sacrifice of New York, I should say. Hello, Giants. This is going to be a very bad day for you. So, in exchange for the Yankees winning the AL pennant once again, somebody had to pay, and it was the Giants and especially Daniel Jones. In the case of the Giants, Saquon Barkley returned to MetLife, this time as an op. And he didn't let people forget it, even though he didn't want to bring up this conversation. Instead of people burning jerseys, Saquon Barkley burned their defenders. He had 170 plus yards of total offense. He's like that. He's always been like that. What else was like that, for once, was the Eagles' pass rush. It didn't really exist going into this game, but it absolutely existed during this game. 8 sacks, and they were coming from everywhere. Daniel Jones had no chance. Drew Lock had no chance. It wouldn't have mattered who was the quarterback. He would have got his brains beat in. So yes, there was some bad news for the Giants. But the good news is, and it's not really much good news for the Giants to celebrate, it's just a continuing trend. They did shut out the Eagles in the first quarter. But like I said, it's a continuing trend because everybody shuts out the Eagles in the first quarter. They still haven't scored points in the first 15 minutes of the game. which in itself is alarming and disappointing. And now to the two games that everybody paid attention to in the 1 o'clock bracket of Sunday football. And they both lived up to the hype. First, let's go to Lambeau in the whiteout condition jerseys, where the Packers and Texans played. Jordan Love wearing the Brett Favre jersey a couple of weeks ago, I think it's way more fitting than we really gave credit to from the go. He really kind of is Brett Favre revisited. He's more mobile, yes, but he's Brett Favre revisited because he makes a lot of crazy, insane, I can't believe he made that throw in a great way, and then crazy, insane, I can't believe he made that throw in a bad way. Bad innos are thrown, great tutties are thrown, and crazy throws are thrown all the same. Josh Jacobs runs the ball pretty well, and the Packers and Texans put on a good show. The defense did really well, Green Bay's did, against CJ Stroud, but it was Joe Mixon who cooked and scored a couple times. Ultimately, these two teams seem to be incredibly evenly matched. Unfortunately for the Texans, the Packers got the ball last, and with that came a decent drive, and Brandon McManus, who's always had a big leg to kick game-winning field goals, kicked one more to get it done for Green Bay. No shame in this loss, Houston. It's another loss to the NFC North, but the Division of Doom is going to beat a lot of different teams this year. You have no losses in conference. That's going to come into play later. For the Packers, you keep up with the next game on the list. The Lions and the Vikings. Detroit, who's got one of the most complete and dominant offenses in the league. The Vikings with one of the more complete, disruptive, and destructive defenses in the league. They really did show themselves early. Minnesota was able to get home and get to Goff a few times, and once Goff figured it out, things cooked. Meanwhile, on the opposite side of business, we absolutely got some really good Viking offense and some Detroit defense, though minus Aiden Hutchinson was actually able to get home at a good clip to go get Sam Darnold. It was impressive to see. Ultimately, just like the Packers-Texans game, it wasn't a matter of who would have it last. That answer would be the Lions. At this great play from both sides, Minnesota was able to score a touchdown to go ahead, but not get the 2-point conversion. So instead of being up 3, they were only up by 1, and that's all Detroit needed. Detroit was able to get down the field just in time, and then bury a last-second field goal to close it out and get a signature win for a Lions team that probably needed to pick me up after losing their best player in Aiden Hutchinson. So Detroit gets another statement win, and I think it's proven themselves worthy of being the best team in the NFC. For Minnesota, no shame in this loss. You just lost to a really good team. You will see them again, especially in Week 18. The last of the 1 o'clock games is kind of simple here. Seattle, Atlanta, can you explain what you really are this year so far? Just when you think Atlanta has got their head on straight, they're starting to move forward, they're making some things happen, they got signature wins back-to-back against the two main contenders of the NFC South, and you get your brains beaten by Seattle flying cross-country. I can't explain this. Kenneth Walker doing what he does. That's explainable. That's fine. I get it. Geno Smith, when he's actually had time the ball, produced when he had time the ball. Okay, that's explainable. Seattle getting home and being healthy against a really good Falcons offensive line, that's impressive. There's no other way to describe that. And Atlanta not really doing anything to stop it is rather unfortunate on their end. Again, that's impressive by Seattle. So Seattle kind of sort of saves their season, and they needed to win in the worst way after the Niners dominated them at Lumen Field last week. For the Falcons, the good news is the other ops had some other issues to deal with. I already talked about New Orleans. I'm going to talk about the Panthers, but at least for Carolina, I'm going to make it quick. The first play that anybody paid attention to was a Dante Fowler pick 6. The game was effectively over at this point, and for the most part, it was garbage time. Unfortunately, it wasn't all good for the Commanders, as they did lose Jaden Daniels, and I really hope it's not a long-term injury, because there are some showdowns that Daniels is going to have to deal with in the coming weeks, especially one coming up this Sunday if he's able to play. I just hope he's 100% after the rib injury. This was a massacre and a bloodbath, and the type of game where I could see a lot of people, not just Bryce Young, lose a lot of hope because, yikes, that was really, really ugly. For Carolina, this season can't end quick enough. And for the Commanders, Jaden Daniels can't get healthy fast enough. And if the latter is able to happen, the Commanders will be back on track and winning the East. It's the only way, because I honestly don't want to see anybody else in this division make the playoffs. And now let's get to the other late games. Now, this Rams-Raiders game was also one that not a lot of people probably watched. Raiders fans pulled up to SoFi, because that was expected, and Rams fans did a decent job in defending their house. Tyrell Williams also did a decent job in taking it to the house and scoring tutties. He had a couple of them. Matt Stafford was okay, but not great. The Raiders were somewhat okay as the game went along because it looked like a blowout early and it turned into a close game late. So, I guess the Raiders got better, even though they lost Aidan O'Connell. And for some reason, signed Desmond Ridder. I can't explain that one. But what I can explain is that the Rams' offense somehow kind of stalled and really didn't do as much as I expected too late. Fortunately, it was the Rams' defense that was able to get one last NO on Gardner Minshew and seal the win. The Rams are getting healthier, which is a good sign. Cooper Kupp's on his way back. Puka Nacua's on his way back. If both of them can come back, maybe the Rams have a fair shot at winning the NFC West. This division's kind of sort of wide open because the Niners, who were everybody's favorite, well, mostly everyone's favorite, to win the division, are kind of in a 2020 remix. Let me explain. This all started with the Super Bowl and the Dre Greenlaw Achilles tear. He obviously hasn't played since. He may not play this year at all. Then CMC gets the Madden cover, and we know the Madden curse is real, so McCaffrey gets hurt, and he might not play at all. And now we got a Jawan Jennings who's hurt, and he didn't play in this game, and we've got Ufunga coming off the ACL. We also have Javon Hargrave who's out for the year. That's a big, big loss on the defensive line. We have Deebo Samuel getting pneumonia, so he tried to give it a go, but he just wasn't there. Brandon Ayuk tore his ACL towards the end of the first half, so he's out, obviously. Jordan Mason's missed some time, filling in for CMC, though he did play in this game. It's becoming the 2020 remakes where everybody's getting hurt. Brock Purdy did not get hurt, but he did hurt the chances of the Niners to win this game. 3 very horrible NOs, all of which in Chiefs territory, and really points could have been gained for the Niners to try to hold off Kansas City, who, to be fair, did not play as well on offense, sans Kareem Hunt, because Hunt did play well, and it was because Pat Mahomes wasn't all that good until he had to be great. And that is what really, really stings the other 31 teams in the league and their fan bases. When Mahomes has to be great, there's no one better. And that may be ever. Those 2 runs Mahomes made to really put this game away are just devastating. The first being that sideline run where he outruns Fred Warner and runs away from other linebackers, and it fakes another one 10 yards down the field with a pump fake for some reason, and he gets 30 on that play. Basically, it's the Titans run from the AFC Championship before they won their first ring. And then it's the piece de resistance where he truck sticked Mustafa and stepped over him, on him, I should say. And it felt like disrespect, though it really didn't seem disrespectful from Mahomes. Evil Kermit would approve of this. And then it's just ugly to see that if you're a Niner fan. Purdy's in the end zone was probably the last real hope that the Niners had in this game. And from then on, it was Kansas City being able to salt it away and do enough to keep the Niners away from them. It's a backbreaking loss for the Niners, I would say, morale-wise, and for their fans morale-wise, because you got to know if you can beat the Chiefs. The Niners just can't. For Kansas City, they're the last undefeated standing. And the question is simple. Will they remain that way the rest of the way through? A sports soul for a sports soul. I explained it a little bit with the Guardian series with the Yankees and how both cities have had to sacrifice some things. But this one's more so about New York. The first part being the Jets and the Steelers, where the Jets have moved heaven and earth to try to get Aaron Rodgers back to his Green Bay comfort zone, and in this case, it was getting Devontae Adams back. He wasn't all that effective in this offense. Really, it was Garrett Wilson who was the I guess, main target in the sense of the key plays in this game were a lot of them targeted to Wilson or Breece Hall. Hall got a dump off or two and made chunk plays happen. But where Rodgers was throwing innos, they were thrown towards Garrett Wilson, one of which was a stupid one in triple coverage, one of which was one that Wilson probably should have grabbed. He didn't, and it was picked, and there was a return involved, and the Steelers, after spotting the Jets a 15-6 lead, were the dominant team and the superior team pretty much all the way through. Russell Wilson started slow and then turned up the gas, and things were cooking for Pittsburgh. Najee Harris did his thing, and George Pickens did his thing. This was an easy dub for the Steelers after the first, I'd say, quarter and a half, and this continues a run of futility for the Jets that one could argue has spanned this year, one could argue would span this decade, one could argue would span the last quarter century, one could argue would span the majority of the franchise history. Depends on who you ask. But this was part one of a soul for a soul, I would argue. Part two happened in Los Angeles, where the Mets had to save their season against the Dodgers. The good news is they scored first. The Jets did too. The bad news is they got walloped the rest of the way. Dodgers took care of business, and they won the NL pennant. It was pretty easy, at least Game 6 was for the Dodgers. And for that matter, all four of the wins for the Dodgers were bludgeonings. Not great for the Mets. But why do I say it's a soul for a soul? Well, there's the New York Liberty, who at the same time were playing as the Mets and the Jets were. I actually produced this game for SiriusXM as well. It was a tremendous game and in a tremendous series for a really good year in WNBA. Seriously, go back and watch the highlights for these 5 games in the series between the New York Liberty and Minnesota Lynx. They were all really good. It deserved the overtime it got. The situation when it came to the officiating, probably not the greatest, considering the Liberty got a lot of free throws, hit 3 times as many as Minnesota did, and attempted 3 times as many as Minnesota did. That wasn't great, but it was a really good game all the same, and a really entertaining one. Both teams were ice cold to start the game, too. I think they were both kind of just jittery and anxious, to be honest. But once the game settled down, Minnesota got hot and made it happen, and then New York got hot and made it happen. And then in overtime, it was the Liberty who took control and made it happen, despite Sabrina Ionesco's kind of John Starks tribute from '94. Obviously, I mean Game 7. It was not great for her, or for him for that matter. And Breanna Stewart not playing all that well either. Both women would make the plays necessary to get this done. And ultimately, even through all the struggles, the Liberty finally won their first championship in their franchise history. Minnesota did not get Title V, and they would have been the first team to have their 5th championship in WNBA history, but they'll have to wait another day for that. Great season in WNBA. I'm hoping for more entertainment from them going forward. Bring a team to Philadelphia. I would love to go see it. I think it would be super dope. Sports souls for sports souls. It just happened to be the Mets and Jets sacrificing themselves for the New York Liberty to bring a championship to New York. First since NYCFC won the MLS Cup in 2021. But I mentioned LA and how the Dodgers won the NL pennant. Well, there was another LA team that has to play. The Rams won, so we got to go to the Chargers and talk about their business at hand with the Cardinals. The good news for the Cardinals was that Kyler Murray was able to do his thing somewhat. He didn't get the ball to Marvin Harris as much as people would like, but he had that long, gorgeous run to the end zone. And Arizona was relatively solid for a lot of this game against the Chargers. For Los Angeles, Cameron Dicker was really good. He hit 5 field goals. In theory, the Chargers would do something other than hit field goals. They did not. They had a devastating fumble inside the 5-yard line, which led to a touchback for Arizona. They had another goofy fumble in Cardinals territory where things didn't go well for them. And the Chargers seemingly had things locked up after they got the 5th kick from Dicker. And all they had to do was get one defensive stop. Containing Marvin Harrison and James Conner would be a good idea for this. They didn't do such a thing. They unfortunately committed the penalty, and it was the right call. to hit a defenseless receiver that Harrison was on that play, and the uncatchable PI that preceded it on that would have been on the Cardinals, but ended up being thrown out, was also the right call. The ball was uncatchable. It's just a rare call. Jim Harbaugh gets heated at so many small things. This wasn't small, but this was a thing. Anyway, Cardinals did the right thing. They were able to salt the game away after the long plays to James Conner, and the Chargers only having 2 timeouts due to Herbert wasting one because the Chargers were not ready and would have had to delay a game. Also not really good. And another form of chargering in the sense of losing a game you really shouldn't have, but doing it in style. That's just how the Chargers lose a good amount of their games. So I won't count this as one of the, I can't believe they won this game type of games for Arizona. I'll just chalk this up to chargering and just doing it in a different way. Good win for the Cardinals, because let's face it, the NFC West is up for grabs now because the Niners are not going to pull away with it. From one Harbaugh to the other, from Jim to John, from the West Coast to the East Coast. And for Tampa Bay, their offense was rolling early. They did their thing. Mike Evans caught his obligatory touchdown because of course he did. And Tampa Bay was starting to move. And then Lamar Jackson got in his MVP bag and said, okay, I'm going to cook now, and cook a lot, with Mark Andrews and Rashard Bateman. And then King Henry said, I'm going to get in on this. And he proceeded to cook. And his Offensive Player of the Year bag and his dominant bag, because of course he did. Mark Andrews caught a couple of touchdowns, making fantasy owners happy. I hope you started him if you have him. Justice Hill got in on the fun and caught a tutty. Lamar had 5 in total. This was a relatively easy beatdown for the Ravens. Pretty much once they started to get going, they could not be stopped. Marlon Humphrey had 2 windows in this game. He continues to cook because Marlon Humphrey's like that. He makes plays. This was an awful night for Tampa Bay. That's on the scoreboard. It got worse. Mike Evans got hurt before halftime. It was his hammy. That's not great. And then Chris Godwin got hurt in his knee, down 10 with 2 minutes to go. Now, I don't fault Tampa Bay for doing this because it was still a 2-score game. They actually had recovered an onside kick earlier and scored off of it. So I'm not going to say the game was over. It would have been kind of unfair to just pack it up in the situation they were in. It's just really unfortunate that Godwin got hurt. And on a short week with the Falcons coming up, could be a devastating 3-piece combo that Tampa Bay just took. So with the Harbaugh splitting, I won with John but lost with Jim. My overall record for week 7 was 8-7. And my overall record for the season is 63-42. With that, both Harbaughs for that matter, you've reached the final stop of this train of thought. Coming up on the next one, it's power rankings. What team fits in what tier? What theme will I use for this week's rankings? There's one thing that's becoming a constant. Kansas City at the top of the list, and Carolina being the first stop of my next train of thought.